This is Backstory. I'm Megan Zerez. A little over a week ago, a man in rural Cayuga County was arrested by what are likely federal immigration officers. His was at least the third such arrest in the tiny hamlet of King Ferry in less than 2 months. Agriculture is one of the biggest economic drivers for that area, and migrant workers, though not always seen, are the heartbeat of that community. Today on Backstory, Trump's immigration crackdown in dairy country. Stay with us.
Backstory is supported by Cayuga Health and Arnott Health, members of Centralis Health, connecting our communities with accessible, compassionate care that's built around you. From same-day appointments to long-term wellness support, Centralis Health helps you stay healthy and informed. Learn more at centralishealth.org.
I'm Fernando Figueroa, and this is Backstory. President Donald Trump's crackdown on immigration has had impacts throughout the country, and the ripple effects, while always present, aren't always as easy to see. My colleague, Megan Zerez, and I have been covering these stories, and today we're bringing you an inside look at how these stories have unfolded for our neighbors in Cayuga County. So, Megan, can you tell me a little bit about what happened on May 8th?
Yeah, so in this very small hamlet, King Ferry, it's about half an hour north of Ithaca, there was a young man who was arrested by what we're very certain were federal immigration agents. He worked on one of the many local dairy farms in the area. You know, just to give you an idea how small this community, King Ferry, is, it's, if you could call it like a downtown, it's just one main crossroads. That's it. He had, some family members here, but most of his family was back in Guatemala. We know that the state and county police, they said they were not involved in the arrest. We don't know what federal agency ultimately arrested him, but we do know it was, it was not local police. On that day, and that was Friday, the arrest ultimately happened around 10:30 in the morning. Earlier in that day, he went into, I believe it's one of the only stores in King Ferry. And after that, he ran into the fields that were behind that store, left his car on the side of the road. We heard from community members that the day before, he suspected that he was being followed. It was an unmarked gray SUV, and he was nervous. He had an idea of what might soon be happening to him. When he was trying to get away through the fields, that's where these federal agents ultimately arrested him. We don't 100% know, where he is right now, what his status is, but our understanding is that there are very likely to be deportation proceedings against him.
I think we should talk about some of the other arrests that there have been. We know of at least 3 incidents in the past few months, but it's likely that there have been more.
Right. So this is at least the third arrest we've seen in less than 2 months. There was a previous one on March 31st. It was 2 people that time, both, again, young men. Both of them worked at, a local dairy farm. Again, the county sheriff, they weren't involved. The state police, they're not supposed to be involved. As far as we know, they were not involved. And then the really big thing that happened about an hour north of King Ferry, so an hour and a half out from Ithaca, was a very high-profile raid of a protein bar manufacturing plant in the town of Cato, which is north even of Syracuse, still in Cayuga County. That happened in September 2025. And, there were a number of community members from King Ferry that were arrested as part of that raid. This raid, was during the more early theatrical phase of the immigration crackdown, where there were police dogs, there were ATV vehicles, they were using crowbars to open up bathroom stalls. When that unfolded, there are very real allegations that parts of how that unfolded were not legal. In that particular raid, they initially detained 120 people. And in the end, 57 people were ultimately arrested. And,
wow.
And yeah, it's a big one. And a number of those people, did end up going through the deportation process. And it was fast. I mean, some people in less than 72 hours is what some other outlets have reported. Some of the people who were deported, who went through that experience, one of them was a long-time resident of King Ferry. So despite the fact that this little hamlet has, 1,000 people living in it, despite the size of that community, they have been really hit hard by this immigration crackdown. Allegedly, some of the people who did undergo deportation orders, they were wrongfully deported. And one thing to say is these two latest arrests were just one or two people, right? The county sheriff was not involved in those. And potentially part of the reason why is the sheriff was involved in the Cato raid in last September, and they got pushback on that from community members. It seems that they were just doing traffic control, around that plant during this raid. And even with that, they heard pushback. And it seems like they've pulled back on their involvement and their cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. I think it might also help to talk a little bit about, just give the background of Cayuga County and, maybe also King Ferry a little bit as well. It's a little under 30 minutes out from, Ithaca. So it's kind of right in our backyards here. And it's a very different story over there, the way that immigration, enforcement is happening compared to here in Tompkins County, just by the demographics of who's living there, who's working there, and what the immigrant population looks like over there.
Yeah, that's right. The demographics of Cayuga County and King Ferry are very different from that of Ithaca. There's many more small dairy farms out there, many migrant workers, mostly from Mexico and Guatemala, and they're part of that community, like we said earlier. Churches and stores out there really cater to the immigrant community.
Yeah, despite the fact that this is again, a very, very small community. I believe that the population, when we looked it up, it's about 1,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
To speak to how big a part, of this community immigrants are, I went and spoke to a guy who owns a store about 2 miles north of King Ferry's quote-unquote downtown, Jim Wilcox, and he owns Wilcox's General Store. And, one of the things that he said is just no one else is milking cows out here. So just on a socioeconomic level, immigrants are the people who really allow some of these small, long-time family dairies to even exist. And one of the things that was just so striking to me when I was out there reporting, there was a march, the day after this arrest had happened. And it was about 75 people who were marching down this very small country road, 34B, just against this backdrop. If you saw like on a milk carton, like with the rolling hills and the sky with these puffy, perfect white clouds and like the little red dairy barn, little spotted cows everywhere, that's what like these people were marching against, just down this country road. And, when people sort of block off part of the road, it's not always the most popular thing. And there were a number of people who passed by in these sort of big trucks. And I was like, are they going to honk? Are they going to, rev their engines in frustration? And no one really did that. So, I think a lot of people understand there's an interesting and complicated relationship that exists in this particular community. One of the activists said, she felt that certain times it transcends political lines.
Mm-hmm. I think that it's important to talk about the political demographics. Trump has won all 3 elections there.
Yeah.
So according to the U.S. Census, 88% of the community is white.
Yeah.
And I think we have to mention the caveat that, there's certainly people who are not being represented in the census.
And a lot of times the people who are not counted in the census are people of color and people who are undocumented for obvious reasons.
Yeah, but it's definitely clear that Cayuga County is more working class than Tompkins County, for example.
For sure, yeah.
The median household income of Cayuga County is around $68,000, while Tompkins County is higher. It's $74,000 a year. And a fact that I found, really interesting is that Cayuga County is the number 1 county in agricultural production in the state.
Wow.
With their primary product being milk, which makes sense.
All those small family dairies, yeah.
Yeah. So I think we should bring it back to the rally 2 weeks ago. You were present for the May 9th rally that followed the arrest.
Yes.
What was it like? What did you see?
Yeah. So, it was so surreal at times to see this large group of people. I think it was 75 people. They marched for about a mile. And it was State Route 34B out there. It is 2 lanes. You're walking through fields. And it was so funny to just see this rally, this protest that would, you see all the time happening in downtown Ithaca. You almost expect it,
Mm-hmm.
People in Ithaca, very politically active in that way.
They love to take the street.
God love them. But it was just surreal to see this group of people with signs chanting against this backdrop, just with these rolling green hills. But yeah, I mean, that rally was organized by the Finger Lakes Rapid Response Group and some other progressive community groups out there.
And this group, the Finger Lakes Rapid Response Group, has had the support of some immigrants, but many of them didn't feel safe to participate in this
many
rally.
Immigrants, yeah.
Yeah. The response group has been out in churches and schools teaching people about their rights. The bulk of these organizers have been Americans.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really immigrants doing this organizing. That being said, they're out there teaching people sort of how to speak to police if there were anything to happen. And I think that's been a really valuable thing for that community.
They've been active since 2017. So they've been around. They've been in the community a little bit longer than the Rapid Response Group in Ithaca. And both groups, to their credit, they're able to be on the scene if there is suspected immigration action happening. But this group in Cayuga County, the Finger Lakes Rapid Response Group, I think that they've had more time to grow their roots. It sounds like that's been sort of a really big deal. Just a day after the arrest, they're already in connection with the family of that, young man who was arrested on May 8th. I think also just it's a tighter-knit community out there, and, they're able to build some of that trust, which I think can be really helpful in times like these.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into how trust affects our reporting as well later on.
Yeah. Well, you and I have reported a number of these immigration stories together. And obviously, these immigration stories, when it comes to these arrests, these are vulnerable communities. There's a lot that we need to consider. One of the people who was absolutely key in reporting the story was this shopkeeper at the little Hispanic grocery store in King Ferry. And this was the store where the man who was arrested on May 8th went right before his arrest. And, this shopkeeper, whose name we are withholding out of concern for this person's safety, that person was potentially one of the last people to see him before his arrest. This shopkeeper was a very important source of information for this story, and that's an interview that we were really only able to get because we were able to conduct it in Spanish. And, to me, I am sadly very monolingual, and it became pretty clear early on that the language barrier was going to make it really hard to be able to conduct this sensitive interview properly.
Yeah, well, I think that people should understand kind of like how this even happened. It was Saturday, and I got a random phone call from you where you were like, hey, I'm at the store right now, and I need you to speak to the shopkeeper. And, we were able to have an interview in Spanish pretty spontaneously, which I think was really good for getting clarity about, what's happening, and really getting those facts right about like this arrest. The shopkeeper seems to be pretty connected in the community, and so that's an excellent source to have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's a lot of reporting that's able to happen, bilingually in this area.
Mm-hmm. It was actually the first story that the Ithaca Voice reported in Spanish.
Yeah. We published 2 versions of it, one in English and one in Spanish. And I think you and I were like, yeah, this is a story where it's a great example of where that, needs to happen, where we need to get that information to the people who maybe are most affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a really, really big asset, I think, for us, at The Voice. I'm really proud of, us being able to do that, with your help, too, which has been so amazing to have.
Yeah. And with these sensitive stories, like I said, I think we need to be very, very careful about being accurate. These are high-stakes stories where people could be hurt.
Yeah.
So
sometimes it may not be the most responsible thing to go in quickly. We always try with these stories to make sure that we corroborate facts as much as possible using on-the-ground sources, community sources, law enforcement sources, documents, police scanners. There's a whole bunch of things that we can draw on to corroborate things. We don't want to be spreading misinformation. We don't want to be causing panic where it's not due. Then maybe that brings us to the next thing is the question of anonymity.
Yeah, we have to consider when it's safe to name people, and we need to make sure that they understand the implications of speaking with the media so that they can make the right judgment calls to protect themselves. In Spanish, something new that kind of came up was the fact that in Spanish, it's really hard to give somebody anonymity because of the gendered nature of that language. And so we had to figure out like how we wanted to use gender in describing our sources.
Right. I think just being able to conduct these interviews in someone's most comfortable language is just so important to the sensitivity that is required of this kind of reporting.
Yeah, and it builds trust, right?
For sure.
I mean, last year, when I started trying to report on immigration crackdowns, when things, like, again, were very theatrical, I found that it was really difficult. I had been told by some sources that people were not really trying to speak to the media because media organizations reported things without the sensitivity required to protect them. And so when we're trying to sort of do no harm in our reporting, we have to consider, do we still put out the story? And in my conversation with the shopkeeper, I asked them if there was anything that we could do to protect their safety, their privacy, and the response was a little bit heartbreaking. They were like, well, we're a Hispanic store. We are a hub of the community. If federal immigration agents want to come for immigrants, they'll just come here. It's not a secret. So I think balancing that privacy and wanting to be accurate and protecting our sources with the reality that in a small town where it's a very white county, people stand out. And so I think that's been challenging to traverse. So, what's next? I mean, we've been reporting these stories in Ithaca, and now we're looks like we're starting to branch out of the county.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that sort of coming out of this particular story, immigrant farm workers are a really big part of any agricultural community. And, maybe not a lot of people in Ithaca realize just how impactful and how important that community of people is just 30 minutes away, and how differently that community is impacted. And that's some of the reporting that, you and I are hoping to do moving forward. And to that end, I think one of the most important things that we can do moving forward is just to build trust, to go back out there whenever we can, and to be in community with people, and hopefully be able to tell those stories.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Megan.
Thanks so much, Fern. Good job.
High five. We'll be back with the headlines after a short break.
The Ithaca Voice is nonprofit, nonpartisan, and community-based. If you value local news, help fuel it with a contribution at ithacavoice.org.
I'm Fernando Figueroa. Here's some of the other news we've been covering. School board elections across the state are set for today. As a reminder, anyone eligible to vote in a regular election can vote in a school district election. They're some of the lowest turnout elections, but have big consequences for education and housing costs. We heard initial testimony in the trial of Atreyu Maslany, a young black man accused of killing a middle-aged white man last July. The case has touched on the use of racial slurs as an act of aggression, and if the man's death could have been prevented had police and EMS responded sooner. And the Tompkins County District Attorney says no criminal charges are warranted after Cornell President Michael Kotlikoff reversed his car into a group of students. The students were questioning Kotlikoff about free speech on campus. The university says the students' conduct was inconsistent with university policy. The students dispute the assertion. You've been listening to Backstory, the podcast powered by the newsroom of the Ithaca Voice. Our managing editor is Jimmy Jordan. Ron Van Ormer is our executive director. Senior reporter Megan Zerez edits and produces the show. Our photographer is Casey Martin. Our reporters are Haley Potter, Megan Zerez, and me, Fernando Figueroa. That's it for this week. Thank you.